Hello, I'm Julie Johnson, the co-director of the internship program of the National Council for Preservation Education, or NCPE for short. I want to welcome all our attendees to the second of NCPE's summer webinar series. I'm so pleased you've joined us. We have two more sessions after today, both on Thursdays, on July 22nd and the 29th, both at 3 p.m. I'll put the links in the chat if you want to register. I also want to thank our panelists for joining us today and sharing their expertise and experiences regarding today's topic, Nagpra, Museums and Collection Management. I will introduce our first speaker in just a minute, but first I want to say that these webinars are being recorded for later posting on NCPE's YouTube channel. You can find us on YouTube under our full name, National Council for Preservation Education. 2 weeks ago, at our first webinar, I explained what NCPE is and what it does. I want to go into a little more detail about NCPE's members. The organization doesn't have individual members. It's a council of about 60 plus educational institutions that offer degrees in historic preservation, heritage conservation, and cultural resource management. These programs are located in large state universities, small liberal arts colleges, community colleges, training programs, and more. The programs are housed in schools of architecture, departments of art history, public history programs, colleges of design, and some are standalone historic preservation programs. They offer associates, bachelor's, and master's degrees and certificates. The list of NCPE's institutional members is long and includes institutions as wide-ranging as the College of Charleston, the Clatsop Community College in Astoria, Oregon, the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and Tulane University in New Orleans. On the screen is a geographic representation of these programs. Each program meets or exceeds the academic standards established by NCPE to ensure that each member institution provides a high-quality educational experiences for its students. If you are interested in continuing your education, perhaps for an MA or MS or a certificate, I invite you to visit NCPE's website and search its academic programs. The URL is ncpe.us. That's NCPE.us. The National Council is honored to be joined today by Paloma Belazny, a youth programs coordinator at the National Park Service's Cultural Resources Office of Interpretation and Education in Washington, D.C. Paloma is responsible for assembling today's roster of speakers, and she works closely with me to administer NCPE's internship program. Paloma, I think you want to say a few words about today's program and the National Park Service in particular. Let's move to that slide so that you can take over at about now and make sure that we're recording.
Recorded, wonderful.
Sorry about that.
All right, and I work at the Washington office. Thank you for recording. Thank you all for joining us. I'm so glad to see so many interns and folks from different programs joining us. Everyone is welcome to these webinars. And thank you to our panelists for sharing their time with us and talking to us about their work in museums, collections management, and Nagpra. You may not know this, but the Park Service is one of the world's largest museum systems. And each year the Park Service and other DOI agencies host many interns to work on collections projects, including some of you attending this webinar. Before we hear from some panelists, I'm going to provide you with a very short snapshot of how the Department of the Interior and the Park Service is organized so that you can better place our speakers and yourself organizationally if you're working with the Park Service or within DOI this summer. So next slide, please. The Department of the Interior was founded in 1849 and currently has about 70,000 employees and is comprised of 11 bureaus and 7 offices. The Park Service is actually just one of 11 bureaus which are listed on the slide. Next slide, please. In 2018, the department was reorganized from many different regions that were recognized by different bureaus into 12 unified regions to be used by all the bureaus. Next slide, please. But administratively, the Park Service operates within the framework of the Park Service's legacy regions, regions before the unified regions, and those regions are seen on this slide. The Park Service has 7 of those regions, plus the Washington office. So to see which DOI regions fit within the boundaries of these MPS regions, you have to overlay the map of the DOI regions over this map you see here. And I couldn't find such a map, so you'll have to imagine it. And each of these NPS regions has one or several regional offices within its boundaries. Next slide. There are currently 423 units of the National Park Service. Although there are 19 different naming designations like National Park, National Historic Site, National Monument, National Battlefield, we in the Park Service very often call all of our units parks in conversation. And this amazing map that you see here has all 423 units, and if you're interested, it's available on nps.gov. In addition to managing 423 units, the Park Service administers a number of programs that implement the Park Service's role in the National Preservation Program, which was the subject of our previous webinar. These programs, for the most part, are mainly administered out of the Washington office. Next slide, please. The Washington office, or WASO, is a separate office from the regions, and here you can see an org chart of WASO, starting with the director at the top, and the director has various deputies and associate directors, and they are responsible for managing national programs, national policy, and budgets. And 2 of the panelists you'll hear from today work in the WASO office under the Cultural Resources Associate Director, which is where I work. And with that very brief framework, I'm going to hand the spotlight over to Julie for our first speaker.
Thank you so much, Paloma. Let's go here. All right. I really appreciate your time and explaining all that. That's so helpful. And I wish there was that map that, that we all hope we can find someday. As I turn the program over to our first speaker, I want to invite attendees to ask questions in the chat. There may be time after each speaker to answer questions, and if not, we'll do that at the end of the session. Also, I'll provide contact information about each of our speakers if you think of a question later and want to follow up by email. Our first speaker is Emily Palus. She's the division lead for Museum and Cultural Resources with the Office of the Secretary in the U.S. Department of the Interior. Emily oversees the Interior Museum, which is dedicated to documenting, preserving, and sharing the history, mission, and activities of the bureaus and offices that comprise the department through exhibitions and programs online and in the main Interior building in Washington, D.C. She also oversees the Interior Museum Program, which provides policy, technical assistance, training, and data management for the 10 DOI bureaus and offices with museum programs. So with that, Emily, take it away.
Thank you so much, Julie, and hello and welcome to everyone on the line. I am just so delighted to spend some time with you this afternoon and share a little bit about what I do for the U.S. Department of Interior with National Council for Preservation and Education interns. I would like to start with a little something about me. And the reason that I am so connected to the NCPE program is that I started my career with the Office of the Secretary as a NCPE intern in 1999. And in fact, 4 of my 7 staff are NCPE intern alum. And then I would be remiss if I didn't have a special shout out to Miss Claire Bullard, who is our current intern with the Interior Museum. So it's a wonderful program, and I'm grateful to Paloma and Julie and their predecessors. And I hope that all of you are really enjoying your experiences, because you never know what could happen. And I was very fortunate to leave. I was a field archaeologist interested in museum work. I landed an internship with the Interior Museum program in '99 and continued my career growing up, if you will, with the department, working within Bureau of Indian Affairs with Museum Collections, the Bureau of Land Management, further with Museum Collections, and then also broadened to address cultural resources, historic preservation, repatriation, tribal consultation, more generally. And a little over 2 years ago, I landed back at the Office of the Secretary as the manager of the Interior Museum program, the very program I started as an intern with, and serve also now as a role in a director role capacity for the Interior Museum. So I'm very attached to the NCPE program, and if you can tell, to Interior. So a little bit about me. I'd like to spend a little bit of time just talking about the two work groups or two programs I work with at Interior, and then I'm going to share some notes about what on earth I actually do. But so I have the Interior Museum program, as Julie described, is we do policy when we're in a headquarters office, the rules of the road, if you will. We take laws enacted by Congress, regulations that are developed through executive process, and apply those to the management of museum collections. We also write policies and provide guidance to bureaus such as the National Park Service, but also the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Geological Survey, and others within Interior to help those bureaus manage their collections, which, my goodness, compiled represents about 74 million objects and 91,000 linear feet of archives across the country that's managed by the department and bureaus for the benefit of the public, for research, for exhibition, for future access and use. Those collections are housed in over 2,000 different locations nationwide, including both bureau facilities like parks, as well as in partner facilities, non-federal museums and universities. And we work closely with those from to provide access and use of those collections. And the collections really run the gamut from cultural resources, archaeology, artwork, ethnographic and history items, and then natural sciences such as biology, geology, paleontology. As a land management agency, we're largely a land management agency, so many of our collections are recovered from the lands that the department manages, and then are inherently connected to the lands and resources that we manage, whether they're historical items that commemorate events at a particular historic site. They could be archaeological collections from the lands that are representative of, actually, I think, go back to 13,000 years ago to present of human culture activities in what is now known as the United States. It's a very, very large prospect before us. We have a small team, and we are service oriented in that we are here to provide help and guidance to the bureaus and offices, and we look to advocate for helping to pull together resources to fund projects. We fund internships, including through the National Council for Preservation Education. We provide training and workshops. We provide technical assistance and expert referrals. We certainly aren't expert in everything, but we have a broad network, and so we connect colleagues in need of advice with expertise. We also assess museum facilities and collections repositories that hold collections to make sure that artifacts and specimens are being housed in a way as to minimize their deterioration, because all objects are some subject to deterioration, and our goal is to preserve objects for as long as possible. So that's kind of a very broad view that's broadly facing across the department, and in some ways is quite representative of the types of policy programs in headquarters offices, which is often distinct from more operational activities like hands-on. And so within my division, we're also very fortunate that we have the Interior Museum, and Julie shared a brief highlight of it. But the Interior Museum is a true brick and mortar museum in our headquarters building in Washington, D.C. We have a small staff. We have a collection of about 8,000 objects and over 16,000 visitors per year in person. And we have an ever-expanding digital presence through online exhibitions and social media. In fact, right now on Facebook, we're running a campaign that's a partnership with the Interior Museum and Yellowstone National Park, because we're commemorating the creation of that park. And there's a Facebook campaign that tracks an expedition out west. And I'll just leave it there. Just go ahead and go onto Facebook and search either Yellowstone or Interior Museum and hop on the feed. But that's one of the things that's really wonderful about having the Interior Museum to work with and doing exhibitions online and in person, is that we're able to help make connections to leadership, to the public in Washington, D.C., and find ways to highlight and promote the amazing museum collections that are under the umbrella of the Department of Interior. We do tours of the main interior building. So those are the two programs that I oversee as the division head. And you might be, and so one way that I like to look at it is that we do policy, is the program, technical assistance training, and data management. I'll talk a little bit about data management in a moment. And then we have operations, which is the actual museum. And it's really wonderful that we can pilot ideas and test them out in the Interior Museum, and then provide those as some best practices that we can provide to our colleagues in parks and in wildlife refuges and Indian schools, and so on. So what on earth do I actually do with those two broad areas? So I'm a supervisor. So I have a staff of 7 and between 1 and 2 interns. And here we are dressed up, some of us dressed up for Halloween. So we do have fun, but as a supervisor, my job is to advocate and support my staff of senior level museum experts that both either work on operations or on policy. In our museum, we develop exhibitions, and this is currently in our museum. These 2 Thomas Moran paintings are featured. We also have a large collection. Most museums have between 1 and 10% of their collections on exhibit at any given time. Most collections are in storage. However, we do facilitate access and use of those collections. This is actually one of my favorite pieces and one of my favorite projects. It is a sand painting rug woven by a weaver named Bahi Shandi in the 1930s. That was purchased by the Department of Interior, and some research that I did when I was an intern in 1999 I tracked down the Weaver's descendants, but in August of 2019, her great granddaughter and other family members came to DC, and we were able to show them the rug, and it was one of the most special moments of my life and my career. So connecting collections with people who are so incredibly connected to them. I also give training or support workshops. In this bottom, we've right before the pandemic hit, we did an archives training at Zion National Park in Utah. I do collections assessments. This is me at a not so great collections facility looking at archaeological collections that were at risk. We go to conferences and network and raise visibility about the department's collections and try to forge partnerships either for caring for collections or developing exhibitions for sharing those collections. And I really didn't want to have a whole lot of words, but I couldn't come up with pretty pictures for budget formulation and execution or legislative analysis and regulatory review. But I will tell you that budget, I work with budget, and the word formulation means making the case for funding through the, and making proposals for funding through the federal process. And then execution is once we have those dollars, actually spending them. Some of that might seem boring or scary, but one thing that I would impart to you is that budget is actually a form of policy, and Congress identifies priorities through the budget process. So that is an area that never be scared of projects with a dollar sign that will help you down the line. I also just wanted to close to share a note about two projects that I'm working on, and then I need to hand it off. I mentioned the data project. We are currently building a cloud-based consolidated database, what we call the Museum Collection Management System. It's a $7.2 million investment, which is a huge amount of money for me. But will be a modern system for all of the bureaus and offices and our partners to do. And just to give you one example of why that might be meaningful to you, either if you go into interior museum work or continue in museum work elsewhere or outside the museum field, but interested in collections, one aspect is that we will have, currently you can't search about DOI's museum collections in one place. There are all of these different standalone databases. So we'll have a feature, a portal where one member of the public can go in and do searches and find out what collections are out there, and certainly for researchers to gain access. That's one project, which is a long-term project, sometimes very tedious and difficult, but also the end goal will be so incredible that it's all that more rewarding. The other project I just wanted to share, which is sort of the up to the minute, it's on the other extreme, is there is a proposed gift of a very, very large totem pole that weighs about 5,000 pounds. That's been proposed as a gift to the department. And we are working through all the processes to what it would take to actually accept a gift like that and how we would actually care for a 5,000 pound totem pole. So that's sort of a range of things. With that, I think that I should conclude and give time to the next speaker, but I'll be around and we'd be delighted to answer questions, or certainly if you want to follow up with me in the future, if I can ever be a help or resource to you all who NCPE interns and our future colleagues. Thank you so much.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, Emily. That's fantastic. And I think we're going to hold any questions for the time being and allow Sarah to sort of take over. And let me give you a brief introduction for Sarah. Sarah Glass assists tribes, museums, and federal agencies with understanding and carrying out the Nagpra process, primarily by providing training and outreach and managing Nagpra's consultation and repatriation grant programs. Prior to joining the National Park Service, Sarah served as a museum program specialist at the Institute of Museum and Library Services, as a cultural curatorial resident at the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. She has an MA in Museum Studies from the George Washington University and a BA in Social Anthropology and Archaeology from Harvard University. So Sarah, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks, Julie. Can you see my screen now?
I can. Great.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for that, and hi, everybody. I want to echo Emily's thoughts of how excited I am to be here talking with all of you, even though it's virtually and I can't see everybody. I'm still, I was not myself a NCPE intern, but I really appreciate the power of this internship program, and we've had some great NCPE interns in the Nagpra office, so always excited to see everyone and hear what you guys are doing and tell you a little bit more about what I do. So as Julie so nicely introduced me, I am the Notice and Grant Coordinator for the National Nagpra Program, which as you'll learn today is slightly different from the Park Service Nagpra Program, which Mary Carroll is going to talk about. We are in the WASO headquarters office, as Paloma summarized. So I'm usually located in Washington, D.C. in the downtown. I remember always finding it really interesting to hear about career paths and how you kind of get where you're at when I was in y'all's shoes. So that's a little bit of a summary about my experience that Julie also went over. I've done everything from, you know, pest management, picking bugs off of textiles in historic house museums, to educational tours and visitor services at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum here in DC and National Geographic Museum. So I've worn a lot of different museum hats over my my career so far, but I have been with the Park Service now for 5 years as in this role. And I've always had a connection with Nagpra and tribal heritage based on my own background, which I am actually an enrolled member of the Wyandot Nation of Kansas. So I remember walking into the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian on one of my first days of work as a summer intern, and seeing an artifact in a case in the very entrance rotunda way. For any of you that have ever been there, when you first walk into the beautiful atrium, and there's some standalone signature cases highlighting some of the real treasures of their collection. And there was a wampum belt on display with my ancestor's name on it that we had no idea was there, had even existed. And so I can personally attest to the power of collections and these relationships and everything Emily was so wonderfully describing. I've had those moments myself. So that's part of what led me into the role I'm in now. I was very interested in cultural property issues and museum ethics and repatriation in particular, both on a national and international scale. With Nagpra, I solely work with national, but that's really part of kind of the mixing pot that's led me to be where I am today. I have archaeology, I have a bit of museum background, and then I have this tribal connection as well. So kind of found my niche. So hopefully, if anyone's never heard of NAGPRA, it's quite the acronym. It's the Native American Graves Protection Repatriation Act. It's very important for museum collections folks to know about this. And I won't go, for sake of time, I want to keep this short and sweet, but you know, essentially it was passed in 1990 to enable Native American tribes to have the same basic rights, human rights under the law as anyone else, the right to have their ancestors stay buried in the ground and not be desecrated, and the right to practice their religions freely by returning sacred objects or cultural patrimony objects back to them. So NAGPRA really is a process. It's the law is pretty short to read. I highly encourage anyone to go read it if you're interested. And it describes just point by point how to, between the law and the regulations, how museums and tribes should work together to return and establish determinations under the law to be able to repatriate things quick and dirty. So it's an interesting law because of this meld that it is between these different types of different areas of law. I'm going to keep going. And it is a little crazy when you stop and think about it, that the fact that it took until 1990 for something like this to be passed. I mean, today, given the last year, there's been a really increased, attention paid to some of the inequities and inequality still in this country. But NAGPRA was decades and if not centuries of protests and fights to get there, to get to that point in 1990. So I would say that's part of this work. I'll go into, just like Emily did, I'll talk a little bit about what I actually do on a day-to-day basis, which is, spoiler alert, it's mostly sending emails and paper pushing digitally. But it's nice to kind of take a step back and remember for any of this work, what are the bigger messages and purpose, that, the mission that drives all of us trying to do this work, because it's often, that part is often easy to kind of forget when you're in the thick of the emails and such. So what I actually do, well, here, first off, this is a quick kind of very brief summary of the different elements that the National Nagpra program oversees. So we ensure that various compliance documents that are required by the law for the museums and federal agencies, that those get completed and reported to us and shared out to tribes. That includes Federal Register notices, which the Federal Register is basically the daily newsletter of the federal government. It's a place for federal agencies to post any sort of updates or requests for information or things that they are required to notify the public about. So NAGPRA notices are specifically required under the Act to make sure that everyone has due process and transparency. Those are very key with all of this, with this administrative process that was established. So as my title suggests, I'm a notices and grants coordinator. So the notices are part of what I do. I've starred the two things out of here that I really am in charge of. We also have a federal advisory committee that helps monitor and is kind of a governing decision-making board, and hears different disputes and helps provide resolutions to things. I administer 2 grant programs to tribes and museums. And there's also a civil penalties component, and NAGPRA established some trafficking, some criminal penalty side of it as well, which I get to be the good cop. So I do mostly technical assistance outreach. I manage grants. I'm the nice one that gets to come to people and say, hey, you need to do NAGPRA, and guess what? I've got money that I can give you to do that work. So people usually like it when I'm the one calling them, not so much when it's a civil penalties officer or something. So I encourage anyone that wants to learn more to go to our website. We also have a YouTube site with lots of trainings, tons of resources on there. Like I said, if you're interested in this type of stuff, read the law, read the regulations. There's a NAGPRA community of practice that is run by the University of Denver Museum of Anthropology that anyone is welcome to join and tune in, and they have phone calls every like twice a month, just to like hear what everyone in the field is doing and questions and things. So there's really I would say been a renewed push to make more connections and build more relationships between collections managers and the people actually doing this work. So that is the thing I would say I miss about, you know, coming from working in museums with collections and hands-on. I get so jealous when I see pictures like what Emily was showing of those amazing pieces. I'm hands-off. I'm not the one in the trenches doing that work, but I do get to be the one that gets this national overview and outlook on all the different work in this area that's going on. And like I said, I think the best part of my job is to get to give that money and see the results that come out of it, see what people do when they get federal funding to help them do this important work. So I would reiterate, just like Julie said, she'll share our info. This is kind of our general contact info, but I encourage anyone to reach out to me if you have questions or want to know more about anything I've talked about. More than happy to talk to all of you, because I remember very, very well what it's like to be in y'all's shoes. And yeah, I wish everyone best of luck with your internships. So that's me.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Sarah. We'll hold any questions till the end. I'll take this opportunity to introduce our next speaker, Mary Carroll. She's the program manager of the Park Nagpra program, which provides technical assistance and compliance assistance about Nagpra to all national park sites and offices throughout the United States. Mary has a master's degree in anthropology, specializing in archaeology from Arizona State University, and started with the National Park Service at the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training 26 years ago. In 2002, Mary transferred to the MPS Archaeology and Ethnography program in Washington, D.C. She helped build the Park Nagpra program when it was implemented in 2005 and has been the program manager since 2013. All right, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Yeah. I was never a NCPE intern. I will say that, but the program has certainly utilized some great interns to get our work done in the past. So Sarah talked about Nagpra, and I'm happy she gave a little overview of what it actually is, because I don't have time for that, and how her program administers that law for the agencies and the museums that it affects. But as a federal agency that manages public land and cares for public collections that contain objects that are subject to Nagpra, these being Native American human remains, funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony, the National Park Service must comply with this law. And the role of the Park Nagpra program is to help parks and offices across the United States meet Nagpra's requirements. So Park Nagpra is not part of the National Nagpra program. As counterintuitive as that might seem, we are a completely separate program, even though we're both in the National Park Service. And part of the reason for that is to keep away from the conflict of interest between implementing a law and complying with the law. We are part of the Office of Tribal Relations and American Cultures, which we call TRAC, which is part of the Cultural Resources Partnerships and Science Directorate in the Washington office, which was highlighted by Paloma at the beginning. TRAC also includes the Cultural Anthropology Program, the Tribal Historic Preservation Program, and the Cultural Resources Office of Interpretation and Education. And we oversee the Park Service's own compliance with Nagpra. We do that by providing technical assistance, guidance, and training to every park, every office that the Park Service has service-wide in their compliance activities. Sorry, I have to figure out what button to hit here. The Park Service has 7 regions, and each of those regions has designated a Nagpra coordinator. They are the first point of contact for folks in parks and other offices with Nagpra issues. So Park Nagpra assists and works with the regional coordinators to help the parks and offices meet the requirements of the law and the regulations. Nagpra compliance activities in the parks includes creating and or updating inventories and summaries, assessing cultural affiliation or lineal descent, drafting, reviewing, publishing required public notices, as Sarah mentioned, most of them in the Federal Register, responding to inadvertent discoveries and preparing for intentional excavations, developing plans of action and comprehensive agreements, completing repatriations and dispositions, and consultation about any or all of the above, of what I've just mentioned. Summaries and inventories are an important part of the process for items in Park Service collections. These are the required documents for specific cultural items. Just very briefly, the summary includes unassociated funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony. And the inventory covers human remains and associated funerary objects. So completing those inventories and summaries also requires public notifications of the determinations made under Nagpra. And these are done via Federal Register notices. There are notices of inventory completion, which refer the human remains and associated funerary objects, and the notice of intent to repatriate for unassociated funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony. These notices describe the remains and items, the circumstances of their acquisition, decisions and evidence supporting those decisions, and the tribes consulted with about it. Now, every Federal Register notice that's drafted and published goes through review by the Park Nagpra office before publication, and that's to ensure that notices meet the legal requirements, fit National Nagpra's notice templates, provide accurate numbers and descriptions, and we make sure that the evidence that's in the notice actually supports the decision of affiliation or custody. So we also work with parks on new discoveries on park lands since the law was passed, which is a completely different process, which obviously I don't have time to get into, but these remains and items are intended to never become federal property. As a federal agency, the Park Service holds them temporarily until the appropriate custody can be determined. And for new discoveries, there are also public notices that are required. These are not Federal Register notices. These are published in local newspapers. There are notices of intended disposition, and for certain items, it might be a notice of proposed transfer or reinternment of unclaimed cultural items. So we also assist parks with drafting and publishing those notices. Park Nagpra is also responsible for coordinating mandated Nagpra reports. There are two required reports that are related to Nagpra. First, Department of Interior agencies are required to report completed repatriations of human remains and associated funerary objects in collections to National Nagpra program every year. And for new discoveries, once remains or items meet the criteria to be considered unclaimed, they must be reported within 1 year of the date they become unclaimed. And we do that using a list of unclaimed cultural items. We do an annual service-wide compilation of both of those. My office coordinates that, and working with the regional Nagpra coordinators. And we pull that together by tracking published notices, both Federal Register and newspaper. We try to track inadvertent discoveries after November 16th, 1990, the date that the law was passed, and keep track of when remains and items are repatriated and transferred. So just a really quick look at the current state of Park Service repatriation. You can see that we are in pretty good shape. Nearly all of the remains and objects that have been published in notices have been transferred to tribes. Those that have not are often because the tribes have not yet claimed them, mostly because they're not ready to proceed. They can claim at any time, and we would respond expeditiously. So in addition to that case-by-case technical assistance, the phone calls, the web meetings, the discussions with park staff and regional folks, we provide guidance, there is a guidance document rather for Niagara compliance in the Park Service that can be found in what's known as Appendix R. It describes all of the requirements of each part of the statute and the regulations and how to comply, and that's sometimes good to have something in writing to refer to. And we also do training in all aspects of NAGPRA. We have done, in the years I've been in the program, maybe I should have counted them, but I've done many in-classroom trainings. Before 2020, it was largely in person in the parks or at regional offices. Since the last year and a half, we've done most of the training online with online webinars using Teams. Most of those webinars are recorded and they are available on the internal Nagpra website. Anybody can get to them as long as you are working for the Department of Interior and have that DOI network access. And we also maintain and update the internal NPS website, which is, I think, personally, a rather treasure trove of information. It has the guidance there. It has, when opportunities for training come up, they're posted there. All of the recorded webinars are there. And we have an information center that if you're looking for a published notice that the Park Service has done anytime in the last 30 years, it should be there. And there is a mechanism to report inadvertent discoveries on this website. So interns, or as an intern, that we don't have any NCPE interns right now, but in the past and potentially in the future, the kinds of work that an intern could be doing for Park Nagpra program would be creating and updating and modifying that website, which is, that's usually where I need a lot of help. Reviewing the inventories and draft notices, assisting with data tracking, assisting with compiling the data for the reporting mandates, researching past actions such as repatriations or transfers, helping with the training sessions, including potentially taking the lead on a session. The photo there is a training session back when we did in-person training, and that individual, she wasn't a NCPE intern, but she was an intern and she was very good at teaching. She has gone on to become a superintendent in the park system, which is great. And also note-taking on the many meetings and calls that we have with parks needing assistance on specific situations. So I'll end with my contact information and happy to take questions at any point. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was great. I think we'll hold questions to the very end, but I really appreciate you being so explicit about what's going on with Park Nagpra and distinguishing it from the larger Nagpra program. I want to introduce Kristen Stalling. She manages the Cultural Resources and Museum program at the Harry S. Truman National Historic Site. She also manages the Independence Multi-Park Facility in Independence, Missouri, which curates collections for 12 Midwest region parks. She has a BS in the history of textiles, clothing from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and an MA in Museum Studies from the University of Oklahoma. And she has been at the Truman National Historic Site for 22 years. And I'm hoping, Kristen, that you can take over.
Can you see my screen?
I can. That's
Okay,
great.
great. Thanks, Julie. I'm really happy to be here today to share some information about our museum program at Harry S. Truman National Historic Site. I will start with adding a little bit onto what Julie mentioned about my background. I was also not a NCPE intern, but I was a seasonal cataloger beginning in 1999 at the Truman Home. So I was given the cataloging job that I'm told nobody else wanted to do. So, you know, like the usual, let's have the intern do it. Let's have the seasonal do it. So that's kind of how I started and have been really fortunate to be able to continue working here in my career over the last 22 years. So I'm currently the museum curator for the site, as well as the Independence facility that Julie mentioned, and also the Cultural Resources Program Manager for the site. So our site includes the Truman Home here on the left. We have 2 units in the Kansas City metropolitan area. The Truman Home is the home of Harry and Bess, and was actually her grandparents' home. They built it. And then the one on the right is the Truman Farm Home, which is in Grandview, Missouri, about 20 miles from the Independence location. So we're kind of spread out a little bit, but we also have 35 historic structures, including 9 historic buildings. And then we have 2 offsite storage facilities, one that is strictly for the Truman Collections, and the other one is that regional museum facility. Okay, let's see, there we go. The Truman Home was designated National Historic Site in 1983 after Bess Truman passed away in October of '82. She had lived in the home for about 10 years after Harry Truman passed away in 1972. The really unique thing about the home is that when she created her will, she left the home and all the contents to the people of the United States. So once the Park Service received the home, then it was kind of a mad dash to get everything in this house registered and get some accountability before they opened the site in May of 1984. Adding to that challenge was that the Trumans really did not get rid of very much. So it was a whole humongous house full of lots of different things. And then the first curator of our site really didn't cull a whole lot. So we really have a pretty intact entire household. Like I mentioned before, the house was built by Bess's grandparents. So really we have about 4 generations of the family that lived in the home from 1867 to 1982 when Bess passed away. So as you can imagine, we have over 100,000 items in the collection. I think it took seasonals and interns and staff about 20 to 25 years to catalog everything. I can't say we are done, thankfully, but we, you know, it's just an ongoing process. The offsite storage of collections for the Truman site was created in 1987. In the Kansas City area, we have a lot of limestone caves where they quarry out the limestone and then they're left with big cavernous spaces. Companies buy those and turn them into leased spaces for different businesses. And so we established a collection storage facility in one of those in 1987. And so that's really worked out great. Thankfully, we've never had to move, never had to, you know, get a different lease somewhere else, but it's really worked out great. So then the other facility that we have is the Independence Multi-Park Facility, IMPF for short. This was established as part of the service-wide collection storage strategy that the Park Service developed back in, I want to say 2009. And so we were fortunate to be able to create this facility at that time. And we opened in 2010. So we currently have 12 parks with collections from the Midwest region stored there, and it is about 400,000 to 500,000 objects, and archives. So flipping back to the Truman site here for a minute, I wanted to show kind of what the Park Service came upon when we received the home. Like I said, many generations of family living in the home. These were photographs that were taken by the Historic American Buildings Survey in March of 1983, just to document the current condition of everything in the house. So this is how it started, and then this is how it's going. This is the Truman Cave storage facility. You can see we have wine bottles, we have Christmas decorations, glassware, you know, you name it, we have it. This kind of gives a few more examples of what we have in the collection. Like I said, I mean, it's four to five generations of family members' items that really were never culled. So furniture, clothing, Harry Truman's different political ephemera. We have a electoral certificate from the election where he became vice president, games, family items, all kinds of things. We don't really actively collect Truman memorabilia per se, because we ended up with such a complete collection to begin with, and it's really enough to take care of. We don't need to go out looking for just random Truman items to collect, but occasionally we will accept items if they can be directly tied to the family, and if we can see a real benefit educationally or for exhibit purposes, or just for, you know, something that really adds to the knowledge base that we have of the family and their private lives in the Independence community. But this just shows an example. This is the Truman's aunt and uncle's home that's right across the street from the Truman Home. It's a visitor contact station. When we were rehabbing it, we found this tintype in the home that we imagine is probably one of the Nolan family members. And then historic fabric, when we do different construction projects, we will sometimes come across items and we will add those to the collection as representative samples. Archaeology is another way. As most of you probably know, anytime there's a construction project on parklands that requires ground disturbance, you're required to have an archaeologist. So we have quite a few archaeological items that were found on the Truman site. Bess's grandparents were the Gates family. And like I said, they lived there beginning in 1867 and had several trash locations on the property where they would dump items that couldn't be burned, because of course they didn't have trash service back then. So these were found under a driveway about 10 years ago. So we have added those to our collection. In our storage areas for HSTR and IMPF, this is a picture of the lab room at the IMPF. We do have the two separate facilities. They're within the same cave system, but unfortunately at the time we couldn't get them connected or anything. But we manage those with two permanent museum people, a curator and a museum tech. We also are fortunate currently to have a term museum tech to help out at the regional facility. But NCPE interns have been extremely critical over the last 10 to 15 years for us in being able to support museum functions and get just a lot of really important projects completed, both for storage upgrades and stabilization, and also helping with research and digitization and all kinds of different projects. So it's been really great for our museum program to be able to have NCPE interns just about every year. And I'll kind of go through these a little bit quickly, but these are just some examples of, this is again at the Truman storage facility, some of the different types of cabinetry that we use to create the microclimates and just different storage mounts and storage configurations that we use. This is one of the cabinets of Harry Truman's suits that we have. There was quite a bit of clothing in the house, and that was one of the first things that we moved off-site just to protect and get it into a better environmental condition. We also have a lot of his neckties. We have about 500 neckties, so this entire wardrobe cabinet is neckties. And it's really fun for me being a textile person because unfortunately, you know, when you're trying to document items from the collection and you have all kinds of pictures of Harry Truman, you know, black and white photos of him in suits, and all of his suits are brown and gray. There's not a lot you can tell from that, but I can recognize tie patterns. So it's kind of fun to be able to see, you know, oh, he wore that tie and, you know, at this particular function. And a few years ago, we realized that we had the tie that he wore when he was sworn in after President Roosevelt passed away. So that was really amazing to find. So as far as the NCPE intern projects that we have completed in the past and continue to work on, object cleaning and rehousing in storage, creation of storage mounts. So this picture gives you kind of an example of that for some of the glassware, historic housekeeping or housekeeping in historic homes. We have the two historic buildings that people tour that have furnishings in them. So we have, you know, certain techniques that we use that are different than how you would clean your own home. Exhibit development and collection research. And lately, here in the last couple of years, we were able to have a NCPE intern who had an archives background and has done a lot of work processing and cataloging archives from not only the Truman site, but from some of the other sites that are housed at the IMPF. And then digitization, so scanning of images and digital photography of 3D objects. This is a project that was completed this spring. I had the intern and our museum tech unroll a lot of the rugs and blankets that we had that had not really, I mean, some of these I had never seen before. So vacuumed everything and then re-rolled to get them into a little better condition. And then we also added these drawers in some of our museum cabinets for some of the smaller textiles. But kind of one of the funny things that happened is when I ordered these pipes from the company that the cabinets are from, they came and they were like 2 inches too long. So we had to buy a pipe cutter, and I was joking with them that now they can put pipe cutting onto their resume because you never know what you're going to end up learning how to do in these jobs. And this just kind of shows you the process that our archives intern went through in processing and organizing and culling some of the archival collections that we have at the IMPF. So it's like, this is the during, and then the nice and pretty boxes that are all uniform and well labeled and everything at the end of the project. These, believe it or not, are a pair of Harry Truman's opera slippers. We know that he never wore them, but this was another project last year that one of our interns worked on where they made, using stockinette and batting, they made shoe forms just to help stabilize in storage, but also they look nice if you want to put them on exhibit, they're ready to go. So that was a great project to get accomplished. And then the same with hats. She went through and did the same project where she made supports for all the hats in the collection. We have the interns help often with exhibits. We have not a lot of exhibit space in our visitor center, but we try to do 3 rotating exhibits per year just to have another opportunity for the public to see all the collections that we have. Because I think somebody else mentioned, you know, only about less than 1% of our collection is on display in the Truman Home. And we are leaving that first floor of the Truman Home looking as it did when the Trumans were there. So there's not an opportunity to ever rotate things in and out of that. We're just keeping it the way that we found it. So this is an opportunity that we have to share some more of those collections. And then we also try to do social media posts and things like that. So to conclude, obviously, like others have said, our whole goal is to just preserve these historic objects, for perpetuity, and even the Antsy pants, which believe it or not is in the collection. They're men's boxer shorts. And I recently found this little ad. Apparently this was a craze at some point, I think about 1948 or 50. So anyway, if there's any questions here at the end, feel free to, I'm sorry I didn't add my contact information, but we can put that in the chat. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That was great. And I'm not sure if I'm at, oh, here we are. Here is some information before we leave about our next webinar opportunities. The top one is the one that we're in today, and the last two are our next ones on the 22nd and the 29th. I did want to point out to you all the attendees about the one on the 21st of July and the link there called Passing the Hammer, an intergenerational conversation around career opportunities in historic preservation. And I believe what it's talking about is new avenues for possible jobs and careers in historic preservation, dealing with issues like climate change and other impacts that are relatively new on historic properties and affecting our parks. And lastly, here we go. Finally, the the slide with all the emails. Here you go. I don't know if we have time for any questions. I didn't see any in the chat, but again, here are the emails. So please feel free to contact any of the speakers and the panelists, and give a shout out to them if you want more information. I'm sure they're happy to speak with you. So I want to thank everyone for participating, and
I just want to, I see a note about the webinar for the 21st. Thank you for adding that to the schedule. Yeah, that webinar is the Park Services Historic Preservation Training Center is involved in putting that on. So they're really going to talk a lot about hands-on preservation. So if you're interested in your bricks and mortar work, that's going to be a focus of that webinar.
Excellent. All right. This was wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you to our panelists. You were great.
It looks like Zoe and David are interested in a link. If you can send that out. Julie, is there a way to follow up with attendees with additional information? Or another option is to email me or Julie directly, and we can send you more information.
Right, an email with the information for the webinar on the 21st. Yes, I can do that. Probably easiest again to contact us to do it, because I don't have that link right in front of me and I can't put it in the chat easily, or at least I don't know how to do it. So yeah, if you could contact me at manager@historicurbanplans.com or Paloma.
Yeah, or anyone that you're working with, any partner, if you're an ACE intern or with another partner, contact your partner contact, and they'll find their way to me or to Julie. But I also want to thank our presenters so much, and thank everyone for joining. We had a lot of participants today, so that's great. Kristen, it was so great to visit the Truman Home for a few minutes. That was fantastic. Yeah. And I'll stick around if anyone has questions.
Sure. Although I think I need to end this.
You need to end. You can end the. Can you end the recording?
I
That's okay.
don't know how to do that. Sorry.
That's okay. We can
All right, gonna have to sign off.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. See you next week.
Okay.